Please let me know if most of the participants already join and connect with the audio. We are ready to go? Actually?
Yes.
Okay, let's start. Go ahead, Lucky.
Okay, thank you, David, for the time. So, hello everyone. Good evening to our viewers in Indonesia, and a good morning, afternoon to those joining us from other parts of the world. So, welcome to PRANKS Project Management Knowledge Sharing, brought to you by the Project Management Institute Indonesia chapter. So, my name is Iksan Lukira. I'm a program board member of the chapter at PMI Indonesia, and I will be your host today. So on the behalf of the PMI Indonesia and the chapter volunteers, I would like to extend our very warm welcome to our speaker and all the attendees tonight. If this is the first time for you to join the PRANKS, this is a regular event that we run twice a month, and where we invite subject matter experts and practitioners to share their knowledge, experiences about the project. So if you would like to speak at our event, or if you have any suggestion for a speaker that you would like us to invite, please do reach out to us through our website or social media channels. Ladies and gentlemen, as we know, the pandemic has accelerated the digital transformations in all companies, whether it's large or small. From the might of co-location, project teams are now collaborating from different places using a variety of tools available. We know that some teams adapted very quickly and even managed to increase their productivity, but some other cases, they struggle to reach that energy synergy in a virtual setting. As a result of this, projects fail and with varying impacts to their organizing. With this new virtual setting requires a new way, a modern way to lead teams more effectively and more productively in a project virtual teams. And today, we are so lucky to have Lisette Sutherland as speakers. So we are going to talk about the modern leadership in a virtual world. So joining us from The Hague, Netherlands, please welcome Lisette Sutherland, the Director of Collaboration Superpowers.
Welcome,
you might
Lisette.
introduce yourself.
All right, Lukey, thank you so much for inviting me and for the wonderful introduction. They've gotten all this stuff from my website, so you can go, and if you want to see all the background and why I have the expertise I do, definitely go and visit the website. So thanks so much. I run a company called Collaboration Superpowers, and we help people work better together remotely. We've got 95% of the things are free resources that we offer from our website, like handouts and the podcast. And then we also give online workshops about various topics. So if you want to learn more about facilitating online meetings or hybrid meetings, or just how to work better together anywhere, as if, work online as if you were in the office together, then check out one of our workshops. And we also have a podcast. So if you want to hear interviews with people who are rocking the remote world, then definitely check that out. But yeah, I don't know if do you have more, Lukey, or should I roll right into the presentation?
Yeah, please.
Before.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So before we start, I think I have to announce some ground rules in the rooms. So please, for all the participants, turn off your microphone and turn off your cameras during the sessions. And if you have any questions, please submit your question with keyword letters in the beginning of your questions. So we notice that's questions. And we also recorded this session, and the session will be shared to you by YouTube channel of the PMI Indonesia, and the e-certificate will be distributed to you, especially, this is special for the PMI members only, and the credential will be automatically added to your credential. And you can also join us from the YouTube channel if you can join this room, search for the Indonesia PMI Charter. So let's start this session, and thank you, Lisette, once again for having. We are very glad having you with us. So enjoy the session, please.
Thanks so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin my video for now. So you all see me because I've got a fancy tool on how I present. So I'm going to use this tool, and I'll put what it is in the chat because I think it's just a fun tool. But I think for presentations, it's just so much more engaging. It's called and it allows me to present like a weather woman. So that's what we'll do today. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. But I just know that I can't present and read things at the same time. So we'll stop part of the way through and ask some questions, and then we'll keep going. And so we'll make this a little bit interactive. And because this is Project Management Institute, I wanted to focus today's discussion on leadership. And then one last thing before we start, we're getting some background noise from somebody. So if people can put themselves on mute. And Lukey, if there are any questions or you want to interrupt me for any reason, just feel free. Like if I'm going too fast or something's not working, just let me know.
Excellent, perfectly said.
All right, let's get this party started. One thing is I'm going to be doing some poll questions throughout, and we'll be using a tool called Slido. You've probably all heard of it. So this is the Slido tool, and it's just code 1224. I'll let you know when we get there. I just wanted to prepare people. So maybe you have your phones ready or whatever device that you're going to be using for that. But we'll get a lay of the land and ask people some questions so we can see who's here and what are your situations like. So as we all know, as things start to open up, depending on where you are in the world, we know that some of us really want to go back to the office, and some of us really do not want to go back to the office. But what everybody seems to want is the freedom to choose, right? Whether we want to go back. So what I always say, or what we're seeing, is that the future of work is going to be hybrid. So but I like to say that the future of work is choice, right? The freedom for people to work when and where we're most productive, but also the freedom for companies to choose how remote or how hybrid that they want to be. And I want to just give you an overview of what the landscape of this hybrid world looks like right now. There's a lot of different kinds. And then I'm going to ask you what kind are you doing and which kind do you want to do? Because those are usually two questions. So the first kind is people are going to go back to the office 100%. Totally fine, right? Like Netflix is famously going back to the office. Many banks and places like that are also going back to the office once it's possible to do so. The next level is that there are companies that are mandating a certain number of days per week or a certain number of days per month that we have to come back. The next level is that every individual team decides where and when that they're going to work. And then we've got some companies that are going remote first, so they still have an office, but all the systems and processes are in place so that people can work wherever they are, whether it's in the office or not. And then there's some companies at the very end of the scale that are going 100% remote. WordPress is famously going 100% remote. They've gotten rid of their headquarters and all of their offices, and they're just going to be a remote company from now on. So this is sort of the landscape of where most people are. And for our first poll question today, I'd like to ask you, what is your company doing, or what is your situation right now? So again, it's slido.com. I've put the link in the chat as well, and it's code 1224. And I'm going to go ahead and show the results in real time as they're coming in here. So we can see so far, we've only got 14 people responding, and I think there's like 80 something, 90 people on the call. So we'll wait for a few more numbers to come in. So you can see that the majority of people are getting a mandate of a certain number of days per week or per month right now. So wait just for a couple minutes. So it's again, it's slido.com. and code 1224, or if you can scan the QR code, that's pretty fancy. So if you've got your phone, you can try to scan the QR code. All right, so this is what your company is doing. And after this, I'm going to change the question to, what is it that you want? And then we're going to look at the difference. So I'll give you another 20 seconds, and then I'm going to move on to the next poll. All right, keep Slido open. So here, I'm going to take a screenshot. So this is what your company is doing. And now the next question is, what do you want? Do you want to go back to the office 100%? Do you want to have a mandate? Do you want to be totally remote, or do you want the team to decide? I'm going to quickly grab the screenshot so that we can compare it. All right, so now the majority of people, kind of a tie between totally remote or mandates, or the team decides. All right. All right, so this is a great comparison of what your company is actually doing versus what they want. So one thing that I find very interesting is people wanting mandates, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So thank you so much for responding to that. We're going to do a few more questions as we go. So hang on to that Slido link. All right, so the one option, funny, that most people are doing and wanting, it seems like, the one option that I generally caution against is the mandate option. And we're going to talk about why as we go throughout this talk. It just doesn't make sense to me personally. So it's just personally, I think there's a lot of leaders that are worried that people won't come back to the office. But what I'm seeing across the world is that is not necessarily the case. Many people are really craving having a dedicated place to work, or they want to be around their colleagues, or that the work just requires that we would do better work together. And there's definitely a variety of cultures that have emerged during the pandemic. There are some teams that really like and want to work back together in the office, and some that really don't. So, but I really believe that everybody wants to do a good job. And if that the job requires that we are together in person, that most people are willing to do that. So my premise throughout this presentation is people really know what they need in order to be productive, right? We are experts of our own lives. So mandating how often we come into the office is not really it's not really a choice policy, right? It doesn't give us the total freedom that we're craving. So something to play around with there. And probably many of you know Jürgen Appelo. I worked with Jürgen for a number of years at the Management 3.0 company as the remote office manager there. And Jürgen is an entrepreneur, an author, and a speaker on leadership, agility, and innovation. And he has recently come out with a new organizational model that allows organizations to become genuinely flexible, he says. He calls it the unfixed model. And I'll put a link here in the chat if you guys want to check that out. I've got it here handy. And what Jürgen says is that if you want to have an organizational structure that can handle the challenges of the 21st century, you need to ensure that there's practically no difference between a physical team and a virtual team. And indeed, what we're seeing is that fundamentally, there needs to be a shift in mindset that needs to happen if we want to be successful in this new hybrid way of working. We have to go from being office first, where the office is the primary place that we go to get our work done and everywhere else is just somewhere else. And we need to go to being more remote first, where the office is just one of many places that we go to get our work done, right? And that mindset shift is really the fundamental shift that needs to happen if we want to shift towards being virtual versus physical, if we don't want to have that difference there. Now, working in a hybrid way is a very hard problem to solve. We're going to see that it is the most difficult way of working. And I definitely don't have all the answers. So what I'm going to present to you today are the tips that I've gotten from the almost 300 interviews that I've been doing with remote teams over the last 10 years. So you can find all of the information on the website in podcast form. And of course, it was published in the book in 2020. So most of the tips are in there. But what I wanted to offer this group in particular today is I've put together a remote working success kit that has tips for hybrid meetings and icebreakers and other fun things. And for those people who download this super kit while we're in the call today, I'm going to offer to send 2 people. I'm going to do a giveaway and I'm going to send 2 people a pack of these virtual meeting cards. I've got these cards that say you're on mute, or thank you, or oh, I love that idea, or maybe should we go async instead? So I've got a whole pack of cards and I'm going to send 2 people a pack of cards, but to get that, you have to download the super kit. So I put the link in the chat, it's under the success kit, and I'll put the link a few more times as we go. All right, and let's continue. I was going to stop for questions, but let's continue for now, and then I'll stop for some questions. So the one thing to realize is there is no one right way. I wish there were. I would sell a silver bullet formula and then everybody would have it. But really, it's going to be a matter of experimenting and finding out what works for you and what works for your team. That's what makes hybrid so hard, is that there is no one right way. And what works for one team isn't necessarily going to work for another team. However, when we get it right, the payoff is huge. Individuals get the freedom to work when and where they're most productive. So that means that we might want to train for a marathon or just avoid the commute, or just have the freedom to design our own workspaces or spend time with our families, right? Like the payoff for individuals is huge, but it's also huge for companies, because as companies, we get a stronger and more connected workforce that is not dependent on location. So now, as we're transitioning into this hybrid world, now is the time to set yourselves up to succeed. Now we're going to talk about the characteristics that a good leader needs to have in this modern day workforce. But I wanted to start out by just saying that there are some main differences between leading in person and leading remotely. So for workers, the main difference is when we're remote or hybrid, we need to be more intentional and more deliberate about how we use our time, right? We saw that during the pandemic, productivity was not the issue in most places around the world. What was an issue is burnout. So when we blend our work and our lives in this way, most people work way too much. And so some of the advice out there is you want to be off and on. Right? So when you're on and you're working, be on. But when you're off, really take a break. We're knowledge workers. We need to rest our brains. So for workers, it's really about being more intentional and deliberate about how we use our time. Now, the main change for leaders when we go remote is that we need to go more from being personality driven to being more workflow driven. So what I mean by that is when we're in the office and we're leaders in the office, we can lead with our charisma and our personality, right? We can inspire people with our visions. When we go remote, it is much harder to translate charisma online like that. So what people really crave from their leaders is more structure and more organization. what does success look like? How does my work fit into the bigger picture in this organization? And how do we put systems and processes in place in order to get the work to flow properly? Because what we're seeing is that work can really be broken down into two categories, right? There's the work execution, the doing of the work, and then there's the work flow, the structuring of how the work flows through our teams and our organizations. And teams should really be in charge of the work execution, and leaders should be in charge of how the work flows. How do we set up our systems and our processes so that our teams can do the best work? And now in this modern day workforce, it's really all about how can we modify our workflows to be more remote first. So that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about. Okay, but I'm gonna take a short break. And Luki, are there any questions so far that we want to answer?
Okay, so if you attend this, have any question, please feel free to give the questions, or if you want to discuss directly with the with our speakers, just let me know, and we'll give you the access for your microphone.
Indeed. So I'm going to stop throughout. So don't worry, I have a lot more information to give, but I thought that instead of just waiting until the very end, then you hear me talk the whole time, and that might be a little bit boring. So if you want to say something, then please just ask a question, and Luki and I will make it happen. So
okay.
I don't see any questions so far, so I'll just continue.
Okay, perfect. So maybe during waiting the question from the attendees, I heard some interesting topic in here. So I would like to know how the leaders connect with the project virtual team. As we know that to maintain the workflow effectively, sometimes the case is like me is I can feel more bonding emotionally to our team. So how we manage our team to connect even we are in project teams. Thank you.
So are you asking how do you bond with teams that are in other project teams? So it's fine bonding amongst yourselves, but if you're trying to bond with other teams?
Yeah, I think this is kind of the obstacles, like when we have different locations, we want to connect emotionally, but I think it is more easier if we want to giving our team some motivations directly, but if in remote working, it is more difficult because we can give our affections to our team.
Indeed. So, okay. So I saw we had somebody that needed to be muted. So what I would say we're going to talk about team building at the end of this, but what I'll say now is team building should be built into our everyday activities. So when we go remote, it's much harder to do it online, right? We have to do it in a different way. And one of the things we need to do when we think about remote is we have to remember that it's a new medium of work, and we can't do the same things that we did in person and do those things online. So the same ways, like the way that we connected in person is over coffee, right? Or over meals or going out together. That doesn't work online. We have to do team building in a new way. And one thing that I will say about team building is it's all about intrinsic motivations, right? So you can schedule all the quiz nights and pizza parties in the world, but that doesn't mean you're going to collaborate better together. What you want to know is you want to know what is driving people to come to work to begin with. Because for some people, it's about solving challenging problems. And for other people, it's about who they work with more than what they're working on. And for others, it's just a job. Right? So you're not going to inspire the person for whom it's just a job with a pizza party, because that's not what's motivating them to come to work, right? So you have to understand why people are there. And it's hard to do with such a big organization when you have a big organization, but we'll start with our teams and then we see how that grows together. But so I would say the combination of build team building into your everyday activities, and then really start to understand what intrinsically motivates people to come to work. So I see that we've got a couple of questions. Somebody asked, can you please share some company that already successfully implemented this remote work 100%? Indeed, WordPress, GitLab, Atlassian is going in this direction, actually, although they are more of a remote first company. And then Simpress and Vistaprint, I just did an interview them. You can find that on my website. They actually transitioned from an in-person team, 100% in-person, to a remote first team during the pandemic. And so you can find that interview on the podcast, and I'll try to put it in the notes.
Excellent, perfect.
So I'm going to answer the other two questions that have come in a second, but what I'd like to do is move on with some of the material before I get too far, because otherwise we'll never get out of here. And I know it's evening for you guys, so I want to make sure you have some time to get off the computer. Does that work, Lukey?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, great. So I won't forget the questions. So here we go. All right, so I want to talk about some of the what successful leaders need to have. So there's a couple of things that we should really focus on, because like I said, there's no one right way, but we know some of the areas in which to focus. And I would say the first thing to focus on is trust. We want to start with trust, but trust has several different angles, or even several different arms, if you will, right? The first thing that we want to do is we want to trust that it is possible to work in this remote way. So somebody asked about, can you give an example of a 100% remote team? So I want to give this example of the Hyperloop team, actually. And what makes them so special is they were a 100% remote team of volunteers. So they weren't even going to get paid. So it all came from this guy over here, Tom, one of the guys. He was interested in building a Hyperloop for one of the SpaceX competitions about 5 years ago. Now, the Hyperloop is a super fast transportation system that can squeeze a commute of 7 hours into 30 minutes, right? You're basically getting shot through a gravity tube. And Tom wanted to build a hyperpod for this competition, and he wanted other people. He couldn't do it alone. So he put out on Reddit, on a subforum in Reddit, hey, is anybody interested in joining? So 1 year later, with a team of over 400 remote working volunteers, they actually came in finalists in this competition. So in terms of trust, you can trust that it's possible. Thousands of companies have made this work. And so it's really, so if you want your company to be remote first or 100% remote, you can trust that it's possible, but you're going to have to redesign your systems and workflows in order to make that happen. Now, the other form of trust is to trust our people to be productive, right? So a lot of times there's leaders that want to put monitoring systems in place or keyboard tracking, those kind of things. They're effective in monitoring your employees, but they do not build an atmosphere of trust among people. So really, like I said before, people know what they need to be productive. We are experts of our own lives, right? Like we know that if we have kids, we need to juggle our kids and our work, and we know what we need to do. And I think as leaders, we need to trust people to structure their own work days according to what works best for them, and focus then on building a system of trust within your organizations. All right, so just to highlight, I think some of the different ways that we're productive, I want to go to the next question on our poll and actually ask, what time of day are you most productive? Is it sunrise? Is it daylight? Is it sunset, as the sun's going down, or is it nighttime? What time of day are you personally most productive? And I'll show the results in real time. Again, we're just going to slido.com, and the event code is 1224. We've got about 25 people responding so far. So just a few minutes. So what time of day are you most productive? Now, as people respond, what I can say is that these results are not particularly unusual. In fact, every time I do this poll, the interesting thing about it is to note that when we design for in-office work, we are designing for people who are productive during the daytime, right? But what we're seeing is that in this case, it's 33% or 35% of the people consider themselves most productive during the day, and 60% of the people are most productive another time. So as we're moving into this new hybrid workforce, it is really important to understand that our preconceived notions of when people are productive might not be what we think they are. And so we need to design for this kind of work modeling. So I think it's super interesting that our office is usually designed for daylight people. The majority of people are not productive necessarily during the daylight. Now, it's got like somebody like me, I'm a night owl, I'm totally productive at night. However, it doesn't work with my family's schedule. So I'm a night owl that's sort of forced into a daytime productivity schedule. That also works, but it's just if we can design our own days, right, we can design it around when we're most productive. And I think that makes it really interesting. All right, and then the last level of trust, so there's 3, right? The last level of trust is actually trust that we build with our teammates. And on remote teams, trust is built through being reliable, being consistent in the quality of work that we deliver, and being responsive, right? Can I find you if I need to? Those are sort of the building blocks of trust on a remote team. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can build that trust into our systems. But one of the biggest things I think as leaders, in order to grow trust in any organizations, we as leaders need to model the behavior that we want to see. If your leader is lying or cheating, that does not inspire the workers to be truthful and honest, right? So we want to model the behavior that we want to see. Or if you're a leader, maybe pick something that's less grandiose. If you're a leader and you're just working every weekend and you're working in the evenings, that is not inspiring your people to take breaks on the weekends or to take enough time off so that they're not burning out. So again, we need to model the behavior that we want to see. And on remote teams, there is an us versus them mentality that starts to come out that we really need to work against. So it's natural, right? It doesn't even matter where it is. It could be Romania versus the Netherlands, and already we've got us versus them, and there's no rhyme or it's cat people versus dog people, right? It's Microsoft Teams lovers versus people who don't love Microsoft Teams, right? There's always an us versus them, and as leaders, we just need to be cautious of that in our organizations. Now, the next characteristics for leaders, I would say, is we need to create a deliberate plan to facilitate its success. So like I said in the beginning, one of the things that workers are craving from their leaders right now is more structure, more organization, helping set the workflows. So really, we want to create a plan to facilitate success, because hope is not going to get us where we want to go. We have to deliberately plan where we need to go. One thing that I wrote down here is we want our leaders to keep the team on schedule and focused on the goal. And I think that's a good point. Like, leaders set the goal and then we get out of the way while our team takes us there. And I think our main function as leaders is to take the roadblocks out of the way. So again, we want to define our expectations and define what success really looks like. We want to go from a time-oriented thinking to a results-oriented thinking. How do we measure success? What does it look like? What does failure look like, right? What happens when we achieve it? Then you can think of this like, what is the definition of done? So as leaders, we want to define our expectations, and then we want to visualize our work in some way or another so that everybody understands who's working on what, and how much there is. So the more that we can visualize our work together, whether it's a tool or through a virtual whiteboard, the better it is for everybody's understanding of what the work is. And then, of course, setting up regular feedback loops. I think most of us are working in an agile way in one form or another, but regular feedback loops are critical, especially on remote teams. And the cadence depends on your team, of course, but regular retrospectives, and there are hundreds of kinds of retrospectives that we can do, are really important. And then the last thing I'll say on this is don't forget your one-on-ones. Right. So a lot of people, I live really close to some woods here in the Netherlands, and I see a lot of people out walking with their headsets on. And instead of having our one-on-one meetings like in front of a computer, we can also have like walking meetings, right, where we're walking through the woods and we're just talking with somebody. And then we don't always necessarily need to have video on to be having these conversations. So don't forget about your one-on-ones. And as leaders, we definitely want to show appreciation. A lot of people overlook this, but appreciation is also a form of feedback And I think everybody wants to be acknowledged for work that's well done. So in a remote setting, we tend to forget this. We kind of just move on to the next task. But I would say really stop, take a break, acknowledge what people are done. And there's some really creative ways to say thank you, like Fitbit or step counters or gym memberships, maybe house cleaning services or flowers. One of the things I always tell people is you can send a pizza almost anywhere in the world. So if you know your team is working the midnight hours, then don't be afraid to send a pizza. It's great for every meal. So, okay, but I digress. So I want to talk about team agreements first, but I'll take a couple of questions here. So I don't know, Luki, do you want to choose the question or should we just go one by one?
As you go, Lisette.
Okay, so let's see. I'll take this one from Andrew, and I'm really sorry about mispronouncing everybody's name. I'm going to do my best, but I have a heavy American accent, as you can hear.
Oh, okay. Maybe I will read it for you. Okay.
All right, that sounds good. Then people can have a different voice than just mine.
Okay. Okay, we have questions. So there is a question from Mark Lonardi. So Lisette, he's asking, can you please share some company that already successfully implement this remote work 100%? And I think this is the question is along with the prerequisite. He's asking about the best way to manage rhythm of the team. And are you kind of enforce the working hours or just go with as long as your work finish? So
well, I
Lisette,
think this,
please.
yeah, so this is a great question. And I would say managing the rhythm of the team, have that discussion with your team. Like, what should our rhythm be? And then what I just said before about defining what success looks like, I would focus more on what are the results they're producing, rather how much time that they're working on. Because in the remote setting, how much time doesn't matter. What you want, if somebody can write something, I'm a slow writer. So if you ask me to write a report, it's going to take me way longer than somebody who's a really good writer, right? So you might, the good writer is going to take less time, but they shouldn't be punished because they're a good writer, right? We should reward them for doing great work in less time. So really focus on the results in this instance. And we're going to talk about a team agreement in the next section. So with that team agreement, I'll finish answering this question in the next section. So let's take one more question then, Luki.
Okay, magnificent. So there is a question from Adrianus. It's asking how to, or maybe, so he's asking about how to, or maybe any tools to create leadership in this hybrid virtual work situations, especially in project.
So I would say, there are tons of tools. And in fact, I've got a tools page on my website that I'll put in the chat here for people. There are hundreds of tools and new ones every single day, really new ones every single day. My advice is don't focus so much on the tool. Like, it's good to understand what's out there and definitely educate yourself about the landscape. But what you want to focus on is, what is the behavior that you're trying to drive on your team? What is it that you want the tool to do? And once you're really clear on what you want the tool to do, then go out and try to find the tool. Almost any tool out there is going to be good, right? Depending. And also you can find the perfect tool and then your team doesn't use it. So it really depends. So focus on the behavior and not the tool, but keep yourself educated about what's happening, because the landscape is evolving and there's some amazing things like, like this tool here where I can show as a weather woman, that's stuff like that you want to discover. All right, let's do one more question and then I'll move on, and then we'll do more questions in a bit.
Okay, so there is a question also from Ricky Eka. So how to convince to the management that remote working will also give big numerous of success percentage during the pandemic, and is already has a proof in the field? Thank you.
Yeah, the pandemic did prove it already, right? Like we did. So convincing people that we're going to be productive when we work remotely sounds a bit silly to me, just because we just convinced our leadership. We all had to go remote overnight. So it's not like we even had a choice or we got to transition, like all of a sudden we all went remote overnight, and we helped keep companies afloat during that time. So I would say as leaders, trust that your teams can do this because they just did it. And now going back to hybrid, trust that your teams can make this work. And so, there's going to be some leaders that we're not going to be able to convince. They like coming back to the office. That's what they want. And it's their company. So that's what they get to do, right? That's sort of the bottom line of it. And there's some people that you just can't convince. But I would say when you want to convince a leader, the best way to do it is to show them what's in it for them. Zig Ziglar is a famous American salesperson, and he always says, you have to listen to WIIFM radio, which is what's in it for me radio. So you can talk about all the things that you want to do, but to the leader, talk about what value are they going to get when you go remote, and then maybe frame it as an experiment. All right, so we're going to get to the questions, and I promise that any questions that we don't get to, I'll record the answers asynchronously for people, so you'll still get your questions answered. So, but let's move ahead with the presented material, and then we'll stop again in the next section to ask questions. All right, so we've started with trust. We've created a deliberate plan to facilitate success. The next thing that we want to do is we want to engage our team in collectively creating a team agreement. Now, team agreements can happen at a number of different levels. And one of the things that I always tell people in my workshops is you want to understand, what do you need in order to be productive? And so one place that we can start is we can do individual team agreements. And let me send you a couple of examples. I'll send you mine. So here's an individual team agreement example. Let me put one more in there so that you can see two. And I'm going to send you mine, and I'm going to send you the one from Darren Murph, who is the head of remote for GitLab, which is the world's largest remote company. So you can see what an individual agreement looks like. And I create this just for new people that I work with so that they can understand what you need to know about working with me. Like, for instance, I really like to work asynchronously. I'm very careful about the number of meetings that I plan. And I prefer email communication because I talk with hundreds of people a year, and I have a really bad memory. So email helps me keep track of the conversations. So, there's things like that that are good to know about working with me. Now, the other level of team agreement is you want to be able to define how you work together as a team, right? Given that we're all productive at different times of day and we all have our unique styles and things that we need to be productive, how do we take all of those differences and then align in the same direction? And we do that by creating a team agreement together. And I'll give you an example of a team agreement here in the chat. So this is the Collaboration Superpowers team agreement. And you can see we just talked about what information do we share? Where is it located? Are there any security protocols we have to pay attention to? How are we going to communicate together? Let's see if I can move myself here. How are we going to communicate together? If the boss sends an email on the weekend, does that mean we have to answer it? These kind of things. What's the expected response time? And then this third column over here, which is collaboration. How do we know what each other are doing? Where is our work visualized? Do we need to know what each other are doing? Are stand-up meetings enough? These kind of questions to answer as a team. And then since the pandemic, I've added this row here at the bottom. It's the base of how we work together. And that is, what do we need to take care of ourselves and each other, right? So what are our working hours? Do we get time off? Do we have to be responsive all the time? So what do we need for our well-being? Now, the last level of agreement comes from the company agreement. And I'm going to give you 3 examples from company agreements. And the one that I'm showing here is the GitLab handbook. Now, their company handbook has their entire company operating system online and transparent on the internet. So if you start working at GitLab tomorrow, you will see the same handbook as what I can see just looking at it as a random person on the internet. Everything about their company is in the handbook, and they've made it public, which I think is amazing, actually. So you can see some examples of what other companies have done, and which agreement that you need depends on your company and your team. Again, I wish there were one right way, but there's not. The most important thing is that you have an agreement in place. So for my next poll question, I'd like to ask, Do you have a team agreement in place? And I don't mean just a verbal agreement. I mean, do you have something written down? Like, has your team actually sat down and discussed how you're going to work together? So that's our next question. So again, slido.com 1224. Do you have a team agreement in place? And I'll show the results in real time as they come in. We've only got a few people answering so far, but we can see that the majority of people do not, and that is very common. In fact, I would say most people do not around the world, the ones that I work with. So if you're looking for low-hanging fruit of a place of where you can start to help align your team, just having a conversation about how you work together is a great place to start. And it's low-hanging fruit and totally easy to do. In fact, in the super kit, the success kit, I've got some team agreement templates there. I'll put the link in the chat again. This is going to be one long chat. So Luki, I'm so grateful that you can keep track of the questions because the chat is really long. All right.
Okay, sure.
Oh no, I'm going to keep going, and we'll do questions in a minute. But I'm just really grateful that you're here to keep track of them. All right.
Okay, that's okay.
All right. So we can see team agreement. So definitely download the team agreement canvas. There's some great instructions on the website there for you for free. So the next category I would say is we want to, as successful remote leaders, we need to arm our teams with the tools and the training that they need in order to get their work done, right? And what I mean by that is when the lockdown started, a lot of companies tried to mimic the office online somehow. And what it resulted in is endless online meetings, right? Soon we started to hear about Zoom fatigue, and we all know that video fatigue is an actual thing, so for this, after this section, I'm going to suggest that we do a 5-minute break, and I'll put a timer on the screen, and I'm going to just suggest that you all step away from your screens, do something physical, do some jumping jacks, some push-ups, and then come back and see how much more refreshed you feel. In fact, I would say, given that we're doing this section right now, and it's been about 45 minutes, 50 minutes since we started, let's do a 5-minute break here just to highlight how important this is. So if I'm going to share the screen, and I'll put 5 minutes on the timer, and I'd like everybody to just walk away from your laptops, do some jumping jacks, and then we'll come back and continue the presentation. I know this is a little bit weird, but I want to try it out. So think of this as an experiment. All right, I will share my screen. I'm setting the timer now. And you've got 5 minutes to refresh yourself, and I'll see everybody back in 5 minutes. 35 more seconds. That's my verbal cue to get people to come back. We'll let everybody have their full break before we continue. All right. Oh,
Yes.
sorry, Lukita.
Should we count down? 3, 2,
2,
1.
1. All right.
Okay.
Woo,
Okay,
welcome
let's
back.
the party begin.
Exactly. I hope you all felt how important a break can be, right? When we're staring at our screens, you're probably not staring at your screen like I am staring at my screen because I'm having to present, of course. But when we're in these online meetings, one of the tips that I heard from NASA almost 10 years ago now, when I interviewed them, was that for every 45 minutes of online meeting, they take a 5 to 15-minute break in between, specifically because we know that we spend way too much time in 2D and it's not healthy or productive to really be staring at the screens for so long. We're going to talk about meetings in just a second and go around. But before we move on to meetings, I want to just highlight, there's one question that came in from Denny that asks about team agreement that I want to answer really quickly. And Denny, you asked, how sufficient is the agreement, or does the agreement need to be? A consensus is enough? Do you have to have it clear, written, and signed? So I'm going to say the agreement, it shouldn't necessarily be that you agree on everything, right? Some things in our team agreements, you can say, we don't agree on this topic. Like for instance, one common thing that comes up on Teams is somebody really dislikes Microsoft Teams and somebody really likes it. And they both have very strong feelings. However, there's no consensus about which one they're going to use. So we can just add in the team agreement that there is disagreement on this issue and we still don't know what we're going to do about it yet, right? We don't always have the answers. So I would say a team agreement isn't something that is set in stone. Like we want to be, it's going to evolve as our work evolves. Oh, we've got some people that might need to mute themselves that may not know that they're not on mute. So just to check to do that. So the way we're working is going to evolve, and our team agreements are going to need to evolve with them. So just think of them as a living document. It should move, and we should review them regularly. So I'll just say that for that. All right, but back to meetings. So in terms of meetings, most of us are spending way too much time in meetings. What I'd like to know from this group is, how much time are you actually spending in meetings right now? So if we go to our last poll question of the day, so how many hours per week are you currently spending in meetings? Is it 0 to 2? 2 to 5, 5 to 10? Have you lost track completely? Let's see how many people are spending time in meetings today. And I'm not going to show the results yet. I'm going to just wait for a few more people to answer. Otherwise, it looks too sad, too depressing. Still not looking great. This is a lot of meetings, you guys. 20 plus. Now, for some jobs, it requires that we spend that much time in meetings, right? If you're a coach, or if you're facilitating, or if you're sales, like you can have a lot of meetings. It's not the number of meetings that are bad, but if you're spending a lot of time in meetings, then I have some tips for you. So this is some great data here. All right, so we've got 30% are spending 20 plus hours in meetings. 5 to 10 is reasonable depending on the job function. But so let me give you some tips on online meetings, because this is one of the main ways that we can change. So really the thing to recognize is, and what we've all experienced, is that some things don't translate well online, right? Working remotely or working hybrid, we have to think of it as a new medium of work. It's not the same, like working remote is not the same as working in person. And I like to make the analogy between radio and television, right? When you create content for radio, it's very different than the content that you create for television, even though they're both broadcast mediums, right? So the same thing is true for remote and in person. They're both work, but the way that we design our workflows for work in a remote environment is very different than an in-person environment. So first, we want to make that switch in our mindset between the two so that we understand that we need to change our systems. Now, like I said before, one of the keys to this new remote medium is being more conscientious about how we use our time. And an easy place to start is to shorten our hour-long meetings to 45 minutes and then take a 5 to 15-minute break in between, right? Or like what we did today is we just did a quick 5-minute breaks. And what I'll advise is you want to take your break away from a screen if at all possible. And if you can get outside and or stand at the window and get some fresh air, that's even better. We are knowledge workers and we really need time to think, and we need a break in between the different things that we're doing. So if you can build your meetings with creating breaks in between, it will really help you. I can also recommend this book. It's called Nature and Well-Being in the Digital Age. It gives you some tips for how to manage your breaks. Now, the next step is to evaluate, do you even really need that meeting to begin with, or can the conversation be done asynchronously instead? For example, if it's just a status update, maybe it can be posted in Slack or in whatever tool that you're using, right? Or if somebody's just going to go and give a presentation, like if I weren't taking any questions or we weren't doing any polls or any of that, like why would I not just record this presentation and then have everybody watch it on your own time? Right? There's no reason that we're all needing to be here right now, except for that I wanted to meet people and have questions. So there's some back and forth. But if you're in a meeting where somebody's just giving a presentation, maybe consider recording it. Or for example, brainstorming. Brainstorming is great to do separately and then have your discussions synchronously. So getting better at asynchronous communication means less interruptions and more control over our workday. So now the ratio of asynchronous varies for every single company. So some people can do more and some people can do less, but everybody can benefit from becoming a little bit more asynchronous, because the idea behind it is that we want to reduce the number of meetings that we need. But of course, at the same time, we still need meetings. We still want to talk to each other synchronously. So at the same time, we want to improve the ones that we're having. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can improve the meetings. Now, one of my favorite quotes from the interviews that I did came from an Agile coach named Bill Krebs. And he said, people think they want to be co-located, but what we really want is high bandwidth communication, right? We want to be able to talk to people online as if they were in the room with us. And I always say we want it to be like Star Trek. We want to push a button on our chest and be like, Lisette to bridge, report. And from anywhere on the ship, I can get a report and there's no barking dogs or coffee shop sounds in the background, right? We want crystal clear, high bandwidth communication. Now, in order to do that, we need to improve our infrastructure as much as we can. And that goes for both individuals and companies. So if you want to work remotely and you want to convince your boss that you're going to be fine working remotely, well, then you're going to have a setup that allows you to connect with your colleagues when necessary. So that might mean, that you have to improve the internet connection, that you have to get a better webcam, that you might need a noise canceling headset. It depends on the situation that you have, of course, but we as individuals need to take responsibility for our remote working setup so that we can do the job that's needed. Now, companies also will need to improve their infrastructure. So if you've got an old conference room like this with those old spider phones in the middle of the table, where you have to be like, hey, Bob, it's Lisette, can you hear me? Like, this is not a great setup for remote participants because we can't see them. They're not present in the room. So if we're going to be having hybrid meetings, we need to improve the infrastructure at our offices in order to accommodate those hybrid meetings. So it goes from both sides, right? It's the individual and it's the company perspective. And of course, I really think that for companies, oops, I skipped a slide. I think that for companies, it's important to be able to visualize our ideas and our brainstorming together. So one of the things that I recommend for remote teams is learn how to use a virtual whiteboard. Doesn't matter which one, they're all really good. There's Jamboards and Miro and Mural and Teams, all kinds of virtual whiteboards out there. But being able to ideate and draw your ideas for each other is really important. And of course, if you want to get fancy, there are some fabulous tools on the market. Like this is a virtual whiteboard that projects onto your wall. So you can actually use it from your tablet, or you can actually draw as it's a projection on the wall. So this way that, this is great for hybrid meetings. And there's all kinds, there are all kinds of tools out there to help people connect. But again, it's not about the tool, it's about the behavior that you want to inspire on the team. And of course, if your team needs training, then you want to get the training that they need. If your team is struggling with this new medium, then these are new skills that we need to learn. So I offer training, of course, but there's many other people out there that offer trainings. Whichever one you take, it's better than not doing the trainings at all. So I'm going to end with just a couple more things, and then we'll take the rest of the questions and we'll do the giveaway. So is it still good, Lukey? Am I still?
Okay, I think we have still have time until 8:30 Jakarta time zone.
Okay, so we still have 20 minutes, and I'll make sure we're all out, because 8:30, we should not be in online meetings at 8:30 at night, right? We want to get back to our families and to our evenings together. So we'll make sure that we're out.
Okay,
so
perfect.
The last thing that I'll say then, in terms of what a successful remote leader needs, is we want to be able to experiment with small steps. Going hybrid is a change management program. And when we all went remote because of COVID, we didn't have the luxury to do things in small steps. We had to go remote overnight, and we all did a really great job, I would say, in terms of going remote overnight. Now that we're going hybrid, we have the luxury of experimenting with what's going to work for you and what's going to work for your team. So as leaders, my advice is get in the mud with your team so that you understand the pain, any pain that they are experiencing. So join meetings, ask how things are doing, have those one-on-ones, really understand what your team is doing. And then before, I was going to talk about team building here, but I talked about it before. Team building is all about aligning around a purpose and understanding what brings us to work. So really, the Management 3.0 Moving Motivators exercise is a fabulous exercise to help understand each other's intrinsic motivations. But instead of trying to control people or having pizza parties, or, because the last thing, if we have 20 hours of meetings during the week, or if you've lost track completely, the last thing you want to do on a Friday night is go to a virtual quiz night, right? Or a virtual pizza party. Most of us just want to relax and get off our screens. So we want to do team building. We want to integrate it into our everyday activities and then really understand our people in a new way. All right, so just to wrap up with the information that I have, we know that the future of work is going to be choice. But it turns out that choice is surprisingly difficult. It's just a matter of acknowledging that the hybrid way of working is going to be difficult. And again, this is the landscape of hybrid. We can go everything from back to the office to totally remote. Everything exists in between. And there is no one right way or one right model. It's a matter of what works best for you and your team and your company. But when we get the hybrid way of working right, the payoff is huge. We as individuals get the freedom to design our lives around the things that we love the most, and our companies get a stronger and more connected workforce that is not dependent on location. And so really, again, all 5 things that a successful remote leader needs to have, it's a lot. And so that's what I mean by starting with small steps, right? You can't do everything at once. So I would say, think about what is the area in which you could start tomorrow. Could you schedule a training, or could you create a team agreement? Could you maybe visualize your work a little bit better, or think about ways to become more reliable with your team or more responsive with your team, right? So experimenting with small steps is the way to do things. Now, to end, we're going to take some questions, but I did promise that we were going to do a giveaway. So for all of those people who signed up on the Super Kit, you still have 20 seconds to sign up to get the Success Kit. And then I'm going to announce the 2 winners. And for the winners, I will email you after this, and I will ask you for your shipping address. And so that you know, I delete the shipping address immediately after sending the card. So we take GDPR rules very seriously here at Collaboration Superpowers. All right, let's announce the winners. So for all the people, we had a lot of people signing up. Here we go. So I'll apologize for mispronouncing your name in advance. The first winner today is going to be Ricky Kayati. Ricky Kayati, and if I've mispronounced your name, don't worry, I will email. So that's our first winner. And our second winner for today is going to be Hadi Weed Jaja. Hadi Weed Jaja. So don't worry if you have no idea who I'm talking about. If you won, I will send you an email afterwards. So congratulations to our two winners today. Bravo. And now I will finally stop talking and I will open it up for questions. So Luki, what kind of questions do we have?
Okay, I think we have 10 minutes left, more or less. So there is a question from Eka Yunita. I'm sorry, from Eka Yuanita. She's asking about how to maintain the engagement of the company when the company is 100% remote. And I think there is also interesting question from the Sikit Guntarto. So he's also asking about how to encourage a team that in a construction project teams and they do in a remote working.
All right, so let's see, the first question, let me read it again, because if you give me two questions at once, I'll forget the first one and I immediately go for the second one.
Okay, I think one by one.
All right, what's the first one again?
Okay, so the first one is, that's okay. I'm sorry if I'm not clear to mention it. So the first one from Eka, she's asking about the company. So she's asking how to maintain the engagement of the company if they are 100% remote, and how to maintain their bonding so they can feel belong to the company.
Indeed. So what I would say is if your company is going 100% remote, that doesn't mean that you can't see each other anymore. So even for companies, like even for WordPress, who is 100% the remote, they encourage their project teams to get together and meet. It's just that they don't have an official office where to do it. So in fact, Scott Birkin wrote a fabulous book about WordPress. It's called A Year Without Pants, is what it's called. I promise it's a really good book. But in there, he describes like their team actually, I think, flew to Greece. It was, I can't remember exactly, but their team flew to Greece and rented out a whole big Airbnb and then stayed in Greece for like a month or a week. You know, and that's not the situation for every team, but I would say just because you're 100% remote, still make it easy for people to get together, because it is important. While high performing teams don't rely on presence, there really is nothing like hanging out over a big pile of nachos and some Coca-Cola or some beer, whatever it is that you like to drink, right? There's nothing like it. And so if you're going to go remote, I would say one part of maintaining the engagement is being able to see each other, like have an all hands retreat once a year or twice a year, have teams get together. But then maintaining engagement throughout the year, it really takes a lot of proactive communication, right? You want to be able to send video messages, or to have maybe scheduling informal virtual coffees where people that want to show up to have lunch together virtually can be there. So I worked on a team, for example, where every Wednesday at noon, there was a virtual coffee. And if you wanted to show up and just have coffee with the people that were there, you could show up. Or if you didn't want to show up, there was always somebody there. Every week, there was somebody there hanging out together. So with remote teams, you have to set the systems up a little bit differently, but it's still possible to do it.
Okay,
all right, now
excellent.
let's do the second question about the construction.
Yeah, excellent. I think we can implement also about the online pizza party to make the people belong to the company emotionally.
Right? It's also fun. It's also fun.
Yeah, okay. So there is another question from Sikit. So he's asking, is there any advice for the team that working in construction? They have more than 500 laborers, and how to ensure that they are working correctly in as the instruction they have given.
So I am not familiar with the construction industry at all and how that works, but what I hear from this question is like, how do we train people to do things better correctly? Can we train them online? I'm going to start by saying there are some things that don't translate well online at all. Like construction work, you can't build a building with remote workers, right? People have to come to the construction site and they have to physically build the building, at least in the world that we exist now, unless you're building something in a virtual world, of course. But most of us are like in the construction world where we're talking about building physical things. So some things can't be done remotely. And it might be that it's better to train people in person. It might that might be it. Otherwise, there's all kinds of online training, things on, people have mastered online learning. And I would say for the teachers that had to go remote overnight, it took them some time to master online learning, right? It took a while, but there are professionals out there that build courses like this that can make them engaging and knowledgeable. So I would definitely look into that. I don't know which ones they are, but there's lots of online learning around.
Okay, I think because we run out of time, so we just have one question left. So there's a question from Dodi. He's asking about what best tools. As you mentioned before, I remember that the tools is not the concern, but how the behavior will be matched with the tool. So maybe you can give the advice for these questions.
Yeah, so how would we match the behaviors of the tool? So one thing, this might not be the best answer to the question, but what I would say is, for example, with my team, we were going back and forth a whole bunch of times to talk about status updates for various projects that we were working on. And we were finding that we were sending a lot of messages to each other, asking about particular projects and what was happening with them. And I read a book, which I can highly recommend. It's actually one of the best books that I've read about this new hybrid world. And it's by Cal Newport, the author of Deep Work. I'll put it here in the chat, Cal Newport. And the book is called A World Without Email. And the book is not about how to get rid of email. I'll say that right out the front. The book is about how do we create better workflow systems and in order to manage our time better. So what my team and I did, we decided that the problem was that we were sending way too many messages back and forth asking about status updates. What we ended up doing is we implemented a tool, and you all know it, it's Trello. We created a Trello board and we put all of our projects on the Trello board. And the rule on the team is that we keep the Trello board updated with the status of the project in real time, so that anytime somebody needs to know the status, we go to the Trello board. So that's an example of how you might use a tool to modify your behavior. And since then, we actually don't have weekly meetings anymore, because we used to have weekly meetings to keep each other updated on all the status. We don't need those anymore. We've moved them to monthly meetings because we can communicate with each other asynchronously in between. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. Really identify what's the pain point and then try to use the tool to solve that pain point. All right, so for any question that didn't get answered, I'm going to record the answer asynchronously. So I will practice what I preach and make sure that we get offline on time and that you still get the answers to your questions, even though it's not in real time. But I just want to end by saying thank you so much for having me here today and for spending your evenings with me. I know that it's late there, and I hope that you got some value out of what I talked about today.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisette, for the pleasant presentation. We are so glad to having you with us tonight. And for the attendees that the question can be answered today, we also say apology. And I think we can you can join for the next session in the futures, where you can where you always welcome to joining us. And I think this is the end of sessions. Oh,
Photo
I
session
love cards.
first. Photo session first, Lucky.
Yeah, but before we go,
Yeah.
before we let Lisette go, we would like to you to do switch on your camera and let's take a group of photo and keep it as momentum.
Oh, it's so nice to see everybody's faces. Oh, that's so much better.
Yes, we stay here for you, Lisette. Thank you so much. Okay, I will start capturing the screen. Okay, then. Thank you, Lisette, for your sharing. It's an honor for us to have you here.
Thank you. It was an honor to be invited. Thanks for staying up so late with me.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe we can meet in the another sessions, hopefully.
Okay, I think that's the end of the today's pranks. Thank you everyone for joining. Many thanks for Lisette. Have a great day ahead, Lisette. Thank you so much.
All right, get
Thank
off
you,
your
Lisette.
screens.
Thank you,
Take a
everyone.
long break.
Thank you so much, Lisette, for joining
Bye.
us.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm actually